I felt just emotionally, I was nearly tearing up.
We just finished our weekly discussion on plot and developing our book a little more, and one of the things that we realized is how we want to use the power of symbolism in our novel. And we'll discuss that in more depth in just a little bit. But first, another thing that we realized is that we have a whole lot more to figure out about the plot of our novel than we thought we were going to have to figure out.
But I think we knew that we were going to have to have a lot that we had to figure out.
Yes.
But I think what we realized that there was a lot of nebulous area. And I think what happened today is we discovered a little more detail on what is in that area that we know we need to figure out.
And I think one of the things that you had said was, this section is going to be the meat of our novel, and we don't really have anything there yet.
Right. If you compare that, the skeleton metaphor, we've had kind of the shoulders and the arms and the limbs. But right now we're realizing that in order to have an effective story, we've got some internal organs that are going to need to go there, and we don't have any rib cage to protect those internal organs. So that will be one area of the skeleton that we still need to work on.
Yes. And we're also kind of experiencing a transition from specifically plot-focused to more character-focused. And we've talked about how in the past, how we've kind of gone back and forth from one to the other. As we get stuck on one, we work on the other, and that helps us figure out the first one. But we're figuring out that this next stage is going to be a lot of character focused and looking at the emotions, and not just the plot from a world perspective,
Right.
but from a character perspective and what goes on with them internally.
Right. So the first part, we have the story and the plot as you could describe it in the synopsis. This is about a world where X and Y happens in the world. And now we're talking about what's happening to the growth of the characters, the interaction, the conflict between some of those characters.
Because I think a lot of the plot that happens in that section that we need to figure out deals very specifically with how these characters interact with each other, more so than how they interact with things that are going on in the world.
We have this 30-year period in this world history where we described a whole bunch of events here at the beginning, and the next major world-relevant plot point happened here at the end. And we've got 30 years worth of...
30 or 15? Anyway, a long period of time.
Right. A significant period of time where these characters need to grow. I think, yeah, you're right. It's more like 15. But still, these characters that start out as 16-year-olds, now they're going to be, maybe it's 20, something like that. But they're becoming full-fledged adults, and we have absolutely nothing defined that happens in that period, except, well, something happens to trigger an event that we know about. But we've got a lot to explore in how these people interact with each other and how they're growing during this time.
And as we explore their relationships, one of the things that we want to use, especially in one particular relationship, is symbolism. And there's one relationship between some of the main characters that is going to have some tension in it. And we want to use a symbol to bring that to the reader's mind at a couple of different locations, this tension that is going on between these characters, even if it's not expressed in detail at this moment in the story, just to kind of bring the gamut of those emotions to mind to the reader.
And we don't know what that symbol is going to be, but a couple of examples that we can draw on. An example in The Hunger Games is the white rose that symbolizes the oppression of the president. And then in Inception, there's the top that represents, in a way, some of the tension between the man and his wife there.
And the tension that's there is really interesting because that is a past relationship. There's no going back to that. But the tension that is symbolized there is also this tension of what even is reality? What am I supposed to, where am I putting my focus? And it's very powerful with that top in Inception at the very end scene. That top is the last thing you see as the main character turns away from that towards his children, and he is turning his back on this relationship that is now in the past. There's no going back to it. And he's choosing to live here and now with his kids. And so there's a lot of emotion that goes into there in symbolizing the tension of this relationship there.
And in that example, the top, the symbolism is very strong to us as readers or viewers. It's a little bit weaker in world, but in Hunger Games, that white rose, it's an extremely powerful in-world symbol that's used to communicate messages. And what we discovered in our discussion, you painted a picture of possibly an epilogue or last scene, if you will, of the book. And I felt just emotionally, I was nearly tearing up, having a very hard time just talking because of the power of the emotion in that scene. Sorry, I'm going a little bit off tangent here. It reminded me of something that my daughter, Karis, your sister, had written or spoken about in one of her recent videos. She is a composer. She talks about the gap of those of us who are creative and in the arts. There's something we have in our heads, and we want to be able to put it, in her case, we want to notate that music on paper, and what we have the skill to put on paper, it just doesn't live up to the expectation we have in our mind. I experienced that hearing just your overall description of that final scene. Is like, oh, that's such a rich possible scene. I sure hope we can find a way to develop the skill to be up to the task of communicating that and finding the right symbol that can be used in that scene for communication deliberately from character to character is going to be a big part of that skill.
And I just remembered that months ago, I think before we even decided to do a YouTube channel, as we were discussing the plot of our book, when it looked completely different than it looks now, we had this idea of using a symbol to portray the main character's relationship with his father. In that version of the story, his father had died, and we had considered this symbol being like a toy or some object that his father was going to help him fix. And it never got fixed because his father passed away. And then something with time travel changing that and his father being alive. And the last thing you see is this toy that is now fixed or something like that. I don't remember the details, but I just realized that we've kind of returned back to that. And this idea of symbolism is something we explored months ago at the very beginning of our journey.
I remember that now. And the plot has completely changed.
But I also remember that being there being emotion in that discussion.
I do.
And I think that's a testament to the power of symbolism, that it can portray very strong emotion. And so our question to you is, what is a very powerful symbol in, whether that's literature or in movies as well, because we discussed both of those. What's a very powerful emotional symbol that you've seen and that you like the way that worked? So let us know down in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you next week.